Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Vince, and I've been doing admissions since 1989 and college counseling since 1998 in California.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a wellness coach at the Keenan Flagler Business School at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And I'm so blessed to be able to work alongside both my beautiful daughters at School Match for You, a college counseling firm that I founded in 2010. This week in the news, Vince and I will discuss the decision of Columbia and Brown to reach a settlement with the Trump administration. I will read my fourth article from the Chronicle about what to do about the money problem that every college is facing. And we'll hear from somebody on the financial side at Swarthmore College. We'll have the final part of my interview with Keogh, Chief Academic Officer at College Aid Pro, helping us to understand the FAFSA and the CSS PROFILE, which, by the way, go live in about 5 weeks. And we will have part 3 of 4 of my interview with Dr. Ramon Blakley, who is helping us to understand the University of Texas at Austin.
And now it's time for Hot Topics in the News.
All right, friends, as promised, Vince is back with some more heavy stuff, talking about what's going on with Columbia and Brown and an article in the New York Times. I'm going to let Vince summarize it, and then we'll discuss it.
All right. Well, there's a great article that came out August 5th, 2025 in the New York Times. Miss Otterman and Miss Hartocolius, I hope I said that correctly, are the authors. And this details an agreement struck with the Trump administration to settle a legal dispute about affirmative action and also about what was happening regarding protests that were happening on the campus and unfair treatment of Jewish students. But in the settlement, the federal government and the Trump administration will gain access to standardized test scores and grade point averages of all applicants, including information about their race, a measure that could profoundly alter competitive college admissions. What was interesting in this particular agreement was that both universities agreed to pay tens of millions of dollars to settle claims of violations for federal anti-discrimination laws, including accusations that they had tolerated anti-Semitism. And the release of the information is in response to a belief by some conservatives and others that colleges and universities are trying to dodge the 2023 Supreme Court decision, barring consideration of race in college admissions. But there's what's interesting is that the Trump administration is really trying to elevate a discussion of a merit-based process in admissions, and that would weigh more heavily grades and test scores, and arguing, and I found this wording very interesting, softer measures, such as asking applicants about their life challenges or considering where they live, may be illegal proxies for considering race, which I thought was interesting, the word choice there, softer, meaning less valuable, less important. And I don't actually find that those things are less important, because they definitely influence who a student becomes. But the impact of this is profound, because it could affect colleges and universities that have, for many years, outstanding outreach efforts to underrepresented individuals in colleges, selective colleges across the country. And that there's also, it seems that the result of the suppression is this sort of covert effort to depress the enrollment of Black and Brown enrollment. And that's a quote. It's interesting that the administration has really been combating what they describe as woke university policies, and which means that includes affirmative action, diversity, equity, inclusion programs that it says based discrimination on race. They also believe that a lot of conservative groups believe that the release of this information that they'll have access to at Columbia and Brown will confirm that there indeed are schools and universities who continue to make race and gender the most important criteria in their admissions process, which many people would argue is not the case. The admissions disclosures will provide the government with data on accepted and rejected applicants broken down by race, color, grade point average, and performance on standardized tests. And it seems like when you place an emphasis on test scores and grades, that the benefit tends to help Asian students and harm the chances of Black students. And you're already beginning to see a shift in and an impact of the lack of affirmative action in the number of underrepresented students at the first year's classes of both Brown and Columbia. So at Columbia, fall 2024, 39% were Asian, 12% were Black. A year before, in fall 2023, the entering class was 30% Asian and 20% Black. And white and Hispanic enrollment dropped slightly from 2023 to 2024. And then at Brown, Asian and white enrollment went up from 2023 to the fall of 2024, while Hispanic and Black enrollment decreased. It also has you're not exactly comparing, oranges to oranges. Brown is no longer test optional, so they require test scores. So they're going to have information going forward from 2023 forward to look at test scores, while Columbia is still test optional. And one wonders, I think one of the questions that people should be asking is that if you move away from test optional, which the universities, some really selective universities have been doing, then they leave themselves open to pressure from the Trump administration to release those numbers, because now everyone's required to do them. Right now, Columbia, I don't know if it was for this past year, but in 2024, about 60% of their admitted students submitted their test score. When you're test optional, you have the opportunity to look at other factors that are important. And Brown is saying that, if you're really far away from the average or the mid 50%, there has to be some compelling evidence to take you, because that is an important factor. I think the other thing that you're starting to see is that you're starting to see this push into admission at other selective university processes. You've seen the Trump administration really go after specific targets, highly selective colleges that are really prominent in the Ivy League, and then a consistent battering of cities and universities in California: Stanford, University of California, UCLA, Berkeley, and Irvine. Attorney General Pamela Bondi has asked for their test score information, which is interesting because the UCs haven't looked at test scores for many years.
Yeah, I know.
So anyway, I was like, well, you're not going to see much because there's nothing to see. But one of the fears of this expansion and pushing of the Supreme Court ruling from 2023 is that some believe that the administration would like to see an expansion of not looking at race and gender and pushing it into everything else, which is employment and housing, anything where there may be a preference an opportunity to make a preference based on a student's race, or not a student, but a person's race or gender. So hiring, promotion, scholarship, housing decisions, these are all under the guise in the Trump administration's opinion. And so the article is trying to alert people who are paying attention that once you have access to this information, you can begin to build a case to dismantle anything that's related to race and gender, and that could have profound impact on future generations and individuals' abilities and communities' abilities to move forward in the world.
Yeah, they're not fair actors. It's very clear they've got an agenda, and you've said it. They want less black and brown people. And it's not only here. They're going after corporate boards. They're going after the president of George Mason, who's a black guy. They're putting him through hell. And there's just an agenda, and you can see it. It's Stephen Miller standing up in New York and saying America is for Americans. We know what he meant by that. It's Tucker Carlson saying it's time that we start returning and honoring legacy Americans. And this is just code. We know what this is. And it's very dangerous, because they already have an agenda. Like in the article, the big guy in 1600 Pennsylvania said, this is the end of wokeism at Brown's. They're already coming in with an agenda. We know what it is. The interesting thing is, how do you combat that? Now, here's my thinking, what I would be doing. I guarantee you they're not going to say anything about athletes, football and basketball players.
No.
They're not going to want to get rid of them.
Nope.
Okay. I'll tell you what else they're not going to want to get rid of. The poor kid from Appalachia who's white, who has a terrible test score compared to the national averages, but is actually a really good test score in his context. I've said this before on the podcast, talking with the Yale admission officer, senior person. If I can get a 31 out of Appalachia, like, I'll do a cartwheel. Like, that's probably the high score they've had in 5 years.
Right.
They're going to somehow defend and support that, and they're going to make it all about race. And I just think there's so much evidence. Someone's like, well, how can you be so opinionated? Because I'm watching them, and I'm watching their every move, and I'm seeing what they're doing. And I do think it's going to have profound ramifications. But I think the way you have to push back on it is to expose it that way. So do you want not want any, black or brown players on the football or basketball team because their test scores are oftentimes considerably lower than kids that we didn't admit or that we did admit? Well, no, they want that. Go run out on the field and play and make me money and entertain me. So they're going to say that's okay. You have to sort of talk in that language. Now, look, there's such an agenda. And not just because you present this the way I'm saying, they're not going to change the mindset of the Stephen Millers and the Donald Trumps of the world. But it's ultimately a battle for the minds of Americans, because they're not going to be around forever. And so you have to try to win the argument with Americans. And you have to expose the class element. I mean, you've been doing this a long time, Vince. Both of us have. When we were working with like Nigerian and Ghanaian, immigrant kids that come over here that are doctors, I mean, their test scores are like Asian kids.
Right.
They haven't had the hundreds of years of, families being torn apart and all the dysfunctionality that comes with that and how that impacts, different things. So it's not just a race thing. It's more about social class and, historic continuities of families versus families breaking up and all the different ways in which that has impacted things. There's it's very complex, but it's not just a race thing. I particularly say Nigerian and Ghanaian, especially Nigerian, because a lot of them here. We'll see these kids with their 1580s and 1590s and 4.0s and all these high test scores, and they don't get in the MITs of the world where they're a dime a dozen, and they see that all the time. So it's not just like, oh, black kid, high scores, automatic admit. I mean,
right, exactly.
I mean, yeah. I had a rock star applicant, perfect test scores, person of color, didn't get in Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Stanford, MIT, Vanderbilt, or USC. Rock star. So these schools are not, now they got in a lot of other places, lots of Ivy League schools and other places, but schools don't just say, oh, black kid, high scores, we're going to admit you.
Right.
It doesn't work that way. And I agree 100% with you. Like, they talk about the soft factors like they're irrelevant or like they're secondary. They're really attacking holistic admissions, which you and I believe in to the core, because
Right.
holistic admissions is looking at context. That's what holistic is. I will take the context of where you're from, your life circumstances, your opportunities, as well as what our needs are as an institution, what voices are not here, and what voices do we need here more often if we're going to give our kids a well-rounded education. You're looking at all of those factors and as you make a decision. And really, they're doing something that Andy Strickler talked about with me probably 3 or 4 months ago. They're completely threatening institutional autonomy. It'd be the equivalent of walking into the operating room and telling the doctor how to perform the surgery. That's what they're doing. They're saying, you don't know what's best for you. We do.
Yes. Or, more subtly, the parent on the Google Doc when you're trying to work on the essay, back away. Let the painters paint. They know how to paint. They know how to paint. Let them paint.
Yeah. No, that's certainly a reality, but that's what they're doing. Use whatever analogy you want. Got your car at the Mercedes-Benz, walk in, barge in, go into the mechanic and throw him out of the way and say, do this to my car. Let the mechanic be the mechanic. That's
right.
This is their area of expertise.
Right.
But it's all agenda based. It's all about, stoking the base that feels aggrieved, and you're the champion and you're the warrior for, the aggrieved white man who feels like women. It's not just people of color, women and people of color, and immigrants and people identifying as LGBTQ are in positions they weren't in 50 years ago, and we don't have as power as we once did. And that's why I think the whole stuff, and I have many Jewish families that share this with me as well. The whole notion of talking about, well, this is about us defending or us taking on anti-Semitism. Trump doesn't care about that. He didn't even reach out to Shapiro when somebody tried to kill him. Doesn't care about that, right? It's just a ruse, right? It's not about that. It's about power, and this is what my base wants, and they empower me, and this is also my belief system. I think it's pretty clear it's his own belief system. So it's a challenging time. I think this is going to be incredibly dangerous because of how they're going to weaponize it, and they do have the ability to control narrative in a lot of ways.
They do.
I mean, remember for a while when all you heard was CRT, critical race theory? That's all you heard. Because
never.
And this is not even an issue. But they made it an issue.
Yeah.
And now look what they've done to DEI, something that most people saw as a good thing. We're going to work on equity, diversity, and inclusion. We're going to try to bring different people from different backgrounds, give them a sense of belongingness so they can feel comfortable, so that everybody can get an education. How many people have you and I worked with over the years that have said, wow, the opportunity that I had to live with somebody completely different from me or eat meals with somebody completely different from me, that changed my outlook on things, and that was a big part of the appeal of the residential experience, So most people saw that as a good thing. Now you talk about that, or even the word woke. All these things are just now completely pejoratives because of the ability to control the narrative. So I think they are probably going to be quite successful because of the power of the bully pulpit and the clear agenda that they have. I hate to be pessimistic on that, but I think that what you have to push back and educate people, because when you have the pulpit like that, people just think, oh, wow, that's how bad it is out there. You have to let people know we don't just take every black kid with high test scores. It's the contextual read works both ways. And also, do you really want to make this only about test scores and grades? Okay, then that applies to the football team. See how you feel about that.
And the basketball team.
Yeah.
And the cheerleading squad.
Yeah, and no, they don't want that. So that kind of exposes, well, why is your view is merit is grades and testing. That's it. If you don't have grades, then you shouldn't get in. Then why does that not apply to sports? Oh, because you're bringing something valuable. Is that the only thing that's of value to an institution? sports. It can't be you're bringing experiences that many people haven't had in the student body and how that strengthens the dining room, the dorms, the classroom. That can't be valuable.
Right.
So that's how you have to attack it. And I think, and it'll be interesting. It almost reminds me of like you go with your anti-immigrant bashing and deporting, then all of a sudden it starts hurting your own people because you don't have people on construction sites and farmers and everybody else. And now you have to try to walk it back because your own people are saying, hey, this isn't working for me. So let's see how much talk there is of the test scores coming out of poor white rural communities and who's admitted, and that's not going to be the conversation because there's an agenda. So anyway, this is something we're tracking because to me, when I see what they've been able to do with the power of the bully pulpit and having the people they have in place like Kash Patel and Pam Bondi to just do the president's bidding, I'm pretty cynical about where this is going. I think this could have some pretty profound and impacts. And then when you're threatening the purse, schools really feel their hands are tied.
Right. And they're just hoping that elections will change things. I think with when they have that information and then they reduce the admissions decision to just a GPA and the test score, which are important factors, but not the only thing that influence a factor. And then they start to purport that, oh yeah, see, they were, biasing, they were making biased decisions, but they're not giving you the whole picture because they're not asking for the written words, the written term, the write-up of in admissions. When you're reading applications, that both admissions officers have comments and they try to contextualize why they're making the decision that they're recommending. And that discussion is not there. And probably some of the committee discussions that take place that help students get through the door, those also are not taken into consideration because they're not cataloged. But by providing them with this information, you're reducing the whole process to two things, and they'll be able to create narratives that say bias is alive and well. Look at this.
Yeah, I think one of the things I think is really important, and I brought this up in the podcast before, but maybe not enough. There's a tendency for people to think, well, test scores and grades, that feels fair to me. That feels fair and objective. And one thing I think people don't think about, and you have to actually go back and read Karabel's book on the history of Harvard, Yale, and Princeton. So the reason they even went to holistic admissions historically is because they felt too many Jewish students were getting in if they just went by grades and scores, and they wanted to get more white Anglo-Saxon Protestants in other than these Jewish kids. So they did all kinds of things. There was required mandatory photos that were used in a discriminatory way in the application. And people should read that book. You read Karabel's book about the history of Harvard, Yale, and Princeton and holistic admissions. By going to holistic admissions, and it seems like there's a little secret sauce and we don't exactly know what it is, it allowed them to have less Jews attend and more white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. And the reason why I bring that up is because it sounds weird. People are like, I thought you liked holistic admissions. Sounds like you're against it. No, this is the point. This is the point. People, and someone told me this years ago, and it's really stuck with me. People in power write the rules in such a way so that they can declare themselves the winner. That's been one of the biggest criticisms of U.S. News and World Report. They say no matter what, if they tweak their formula and they do it in a way where Harvard, Yale, Princeton, and Stanford are not at the top, they don't run with that. They say, oh, that didn't work. We need to change our formula because we have to declare those schools the top. Otherwise, people won't think we're credible. So that's kind of what's being done. Like you're writing the rules in such a way not to be fair and objective, even though it's presented as being fair and objective. You're doing it because this is the student body we want. So let's see what we can do to change things so that we can have the student body what we want. Because let's face it, when some people in the administration see people that look like you and me at those schools, they just don't see us as equal. And they think you're taking a spot from a superior person. And that's the mindset. And that's what stems, that's the motivation behind all of this. I think it's crystal clear. That's why I brought up the point of people having perfect test scores and not getting in some of the most selective schools. I brought it up because you have to fight back, and that's how you have to fight back and prove, no, we're not just doing that. Look at the high test score kids that don't get in, and look at the low test score kids from some poor white communities that do get in.
Right.
And you have to win the argument with the American people on this. And I think it's going to be hard to do because you don't have the ability to just pound the pulpit with the bully. You know, when I look at what they've been able to do on things like CRT and DEI and woke and just all of that, I think they've been incredibly successful at controlling the narrative. And I think that they are winning that. They are winning that argument. In fact, I've seen surveys on how many people think affirmative action is a good thing. Very, very different numbers in college admission offices or in education versus the public at large.
Yeah. Absolutely. Interesting times.
Yeah. Well, good conversation as always. Appreciate you, my friend. I know we're doing a bit of a trilogy. We'll come back another week and talk about some of the things going on at Duke and some of the financial problems that colleges are facing. And I also want to link in and loop in what's happening with Duke admitting kids August 6th off the wait list, USC. I mean, all that's related to the money. So I know we'll come back and address that, next week.
All right. Sounds good.
Thanks, bro.
Take care.
Friends, I know Vince and I and most educators have progressive views on this topic. One thing I really want you to know is that we're not trying to tell you what to think, but we are going to be honest with you about what we think when discussing these hot topics. One thing I've been thinking about a lot, and I saw one or two comments mentioned by a few people who completed our survey, is they would like to see some more conservative voices. Now, they aren't easy to find in this admission space, but I do want to try to bring you more alternative voices, more conservative voices, even if we have to do it by discussing articles that come from a different political perspective. Once again, our goal is not to tell you what to think. We want you to hear different perspectives so you can process it and come to your own perspective of what you believe. Okay, friends, if you're a regular listener of our podcast, you know that I've never been more concerned about the financial state of colleges than I am now. I mean, it's something we've talked about on the podcasts. I can't even remember how many times, going back and talking about the impact of the great financial crisis that it's had on colleges continues to have. Enrollment cliff, demographic cliff, birth dearth, FAFSA fiasco, COVID. But none of those things has threatened colleges' financial health with the challenges that they're enduring right now. And so the Chronicle of Higher Ed, which is the gold standard that pretty much every admission office, and just quite honestly colleges use to keep us apprised of what's going on, they ran an excellent article called "The Money Problem No College Can Escape." And the subtitle is 6 Views on How Higher Ed's Business Model is Cracking and What to Do About It. So I've just been reading these 6 articles because they're pretty short. Now, this came out on July 23rd, and making a few comments on them. And so we're at the halfway point. We've heard from multiple different perspectives, and now we're turning our attention to an article by Robert Goldberg, and it's entitled, "The Viability of the System is at Stake." Now, if you want to know who Robert Goldberg is, he's the Vice President for Finance and Administration at Swarthmore College. So I'll read this article. Like I said, these are short. Most of these are shorter than a personal statement. All right, here's what Robert has to say. Higher education is facing unprecedented threats and challenges from the federal government that are financial, structural, and ideological in nature, and undermine the foundational pillars of the mission shared by colleges across the country. Terminated research grants, uncertainty surrounding student visas, extraordinary taxes on critical funding sources, and executive orders targeting diversity, equity, and inclusion programs all signal an erosion of support for higher ed. These aren't abstract concerns at Swarthmore College. We've lost several research grants, Nearly 15% of our students face uncertainty due to shifting visas and immigration policies. And financial unpredictability makes it difficult to plan for the future. We've been working on multiple fronts to plan for and react to federal actions in order to minimize disruption and harm our community. We are scenario planning. We are deferring passing our budget until the fall, when hopefully we will have a clearer sense of the higher education landscape. We are making up funding for lost research aid. We are working to protect our international students. And we are engaging with lawmakers to advocate for Swarthmore and higher education broadly. All of our work is guided by 4 principles laid out by our president, Valerie Smith. First principle, Swarthmore will continue to keep our campus community safe. Second, we will defend academic freedom. Third, we will foster a diverse and equitable community. And the last one, we will comply with the law without preemptively adhering to any changes in federal policy that undermine our mission. We must continue to make the case to policymakers and to the public about what's at stake. For generations, American higher ed has been a beacon of innovation, discovery, and opportunity. It has driven scientific breakthroughs, seeded countless industries, and attracted some of the brightest minds from around the world. Swarthmore alone has 6 Nobel Prize-winning alumni. Colleges are engines of economic growth, social mobility, and civic life. What's at stake now is the long-term viability of a system that has helped shape the modern world. That's Robert Goldberg, Vice President of Finance and Administration at Swarthmore. Now, I think Robert is spot on because the changes in place really do run the risk of gutting our whole American system. You know, the guy in the White House, who I'll refer to as DJT, his initials, he does some things that are very brazen and are very authoritarian, dictator style like that I don't necessarily fear that any of his successors will do. I just think he's just bold enough and quite honestly talented enough as a bully to just kind of bludgeon his way into certain things. You know, somebody once said his greatest skill is his shamelessness. And I think a lot of his successors won't have some of that same shamelessness and even talent as a bully. But one thing that I do fear is that when it comes to higher ed being a punching bag, this is not a one-off. This is something that I could easily see. In fact, I expect in the next presidential election, I expect that Republican candidates will run on this. Because in some ways, nothing personifies the goal of owning the libs more than going after higher ed, forcing higher ed to change its curriculum unless it does what you want it to do. That's very popular with people that voted for DJT. So this really concerns me because where's the future going when you lose institutional autonomy? You know, there's an article out now on public service loan forgiveness. Now, when I did my deep dive on the Republican tax bill, I said one of the things that was great was PSLF, public service loan forgiveness, survived. A lot of us didn't know if it would survive. Remember, PSLF is the ability for students to go work at nonprofits, you know, like hospitals and colleges, and have their college loan debt abrogated after like 10 years of service. And what it has done is really attracted a lot of people into fields like research and education where they wouldn't have been able to afford taking up those kinds of jobs. But if you can have your loans wiped out, then maybe you can do it. So there's a new initiative that's out that says DJT is trying to do an executive order to only grant PSLF to schools that agree to his 4 big commitments. And those 4 big commitments are getting rid of DEI programs, taking the stance on immigration that he wants, taking his stance on Palestine and Israel that he wants, and then also gutting anything to do with LGBT rights. And so he's trying to set it up so that if you agree with him on that, then yeah, we'll grant you public service loan forgiveness. If not, we won't. Now, do I think he'll be able to get away with it at the courts? No, I don't. But the problem is the courts take too long to act. In the meanwhile, you start issuing these dictates and then you change the culture from the top down. And what was once seen as outlandish is the new norm. So my concern is that this is going to be the new playbook. I mean, what better way to build your power base than to own the libs? Those who vote for you tend to like that kind of thing. And a lot of people that run for president on both sides of the aisle, let's face it, they are really drawn to power. Power, the big aphrodisiac, as Kissinger said. They're drawn to power. And so what more power can you have them? Gee, I can control the curriculum of universities. Now, do I think this could also happen on the left? I think absolutely the left would want to do it. I don't know how they could probably think they could pull it off with a right-leaning Supreme Court. I think they probably would think it's not even worth trying because it'll probably be shut down. But I don't know about that. I don't want to speculate too much. The point I want to make is the core of higher ed is actually at stake right now. The loss of institutional freedom. And this is how a society can really change. And I've been trying to go back and look at what happened with Hungary with Orban, and man, have I ever seen a lot of similarities. So my concern is just that we've all become complacent, including myself, whether it's hopeless or it's, there's the proverbial frog in the kettle. Like you just boil it over and over and over, and the senses are so inured that you no longer have outrage, because we all have outrage fatigue. But I thought this article was spot on about what's at stake. And I'm just reading all the articles. There's different perspectives. Next week, we'll have a whole different perspective. I realized that when I was reading these articles, I thought it was going in order, but I completely skipped over the second one. I went from Chris Gardner at Wofford College all the way to the professor at Johns Hopkins. But there's a really good article by Ruth Johnson called A New Sobering Reality. And Ruth is the vice president for consulting at NACUBU, National Association of College and Business Officers. So next week, I'll read that entry. All right, let's transition to my interview with Peg Keogh, Chief Academic Officer at College Aid Pro. And we're talking about missed opportunities on the FAFSA and the CSS profile that can cost you tens of thousands. Remember, the FAFSA and the profile open up in 5 weeks. So we're trying to get this information to you ahead of time so you can fill out the forms correctly.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, we've reached the final part 5 of the deep dive. Peg Keogh, Chief Academic Officer, College Aid Pro, is doing with me on FAFSA and profile, so you don't make mistakes and blow thousands to tens of thousands of dollars when you're filling out these forms. In part 5, Peg talks about parents being willing to talk to students about money and to set the stage. She shares why she feels this is worth millions of dollars. Peg gives her advice on whether the student or the parent should fill out the financial forms. Peg goes on the hot seat in our lightning round, and Peg shares advice she would give her own 18-year-old self. I asked Peg to tell us a little bit more about College Aid Pro. Listen and enjoy. So, Peg, we're winding down here. It's time for our lightning round. But before we do, is there anything about money, paying for college, FAFSA, profile, anything that you haven't shared that you want to share?
Well, I think we've covered everything. I would just say, just at the meta level overall, just the idea that, your child's gonna, and I firmly believe this, and it happened with my two, they'll end up where they belong, right? And there might be some bumps in the road, and there might be some, you can't go there, it's not affordable, kind of hard conversations. But I would say about that is figure it out. If you're married, sit down and have this discussion without your child. Talk about what you're willing to spend, what the buckets are, and then sit down with your child and share whatever you want to share. You don't have to share. I never told my kids what we make or anything like that, but I set expectations with them and said, we have a 529 and we have this prepaid and this is what we're willing to do. And they sat there and said, okay, we get it. And it actually happened with my son. There were two schools, Indiana and another school. The other school was much more expensive. I knew it wasn't a good fit for him, but I didn't even say that part. I just said, you know what? We had this talk and you really love IU and this other school, and this school's not affordable. And my son said, okay. And that was it. I mean, there was no eye rolling, there was no drama because we set the stage, my husband and I. And so I can't emphasize that enough to set. And the other thing that's so wonderful is you're modeling good financial decision making for your young 17, 18-year-old child, which is worth billions of dollars, in my opinion, because as they get older, they're going to remember and they're going to make better decisions and not get into a lot of debt. So it spirals. It's a win-win and it avoids the stress because I don't, all people listening, I don't know what age your kids are, but believe me, it goes by so fast. And then you're waving to them at that dorm. I always get choked up when I even say it because I'll never forget those moments with my two kids when we were dropping them. And you just want the time left to be, positive and good and not filled. They're teenagers, so there's always going to be stuff. But that's another piece of advice. Like set those expectations, sit down and talk about it with your partner if that's the case or whoever's involved in the financial piece and just let your child know.
I realize I do have one last question. What's your recommendation on the student filling out the forms all by themselves, the parents filling out the forms all by themselves, the student and the parents filling out the forms together? I'm sure that's a question you get asked a lot. How do you advise families on that?
Yeah, it's really, in my opinion, it's really hard. I've had it. I've had kids, they play that role where they're doing it all themselves, where the parents are just like an open book. And, I had one, the parents were both artists and the kid was the other side of the brain. And so they were lovely, lovely family. So he kind of ran the show. Usually it's the parent with the students. It's the student FAFSA, right? So technically, if you called up the FAFSA helpline, they shouldn't really talk to a parent unless the student were there. There's two-factor authentication. So when you log in, text gets sent to the student. I think in practice, a lot of parents are doing it mostly themselves. Back in the day when I did it, yeah, it was mostly me. I handled that part of it. My husband was doing other parts of the process with the kids. So I think it's usually the parents leading the charge, bringing the kid in as needed. I think it's pretty rare that the student is doing it all by themselves.
And a lot of times, parents don't want the kids to know all of their financial information.
Exactly.
Hmm.
Like I wouldn't have wanted my kids to know all that stuff,
Yeah. All right, hot seat time. What advice does Peg have for your 18-year-old self?
For my 18-year-old self,
Knowing
my
what you know now.
advice to my
Yes.
yeah, my advice to myself is I should have done what I was good at instead of getting multiple different degrees in things that I loved. And then realizing, when I first got out of college, I was in the financial industry and I said, nah, I don't want to do this. I don't want to make rich people richer. I'm out. And then where did I end up decades later? Like I should have gotten an MBA, but I was a tree hugger, so I got an environmental science master's degree and just never used it because I should have just been my tree hugger activist and done that, but not made it into a career. So that's, I don't have a lot of, it's not a regret because all the things I did were wonderful
Sure.
and I'm glad that I did them, but that would be the advice to my 18-year-old
It's
self, I
great
think.
advice. What's something on your bucket list you want to check it off while you're on this earth?
Well, I love to travel, so there's a lot of places
What's the dream
that I'd
vacation
like.
that you want to get to that you haven't been?
I definitely want to hit Australia and New Zealand when I'm like retired and I have like a good month or, gosh, you could probably spend more than a month, but yeah, that's on my bucket list for sure. Patagonia, it's on my bucket list. So yeah, the world is just there's just so many wonderful places, so I'd love to see as many as I can.
Sure, sure. What's something that grinds your gears? What's a pet peeve?
I grew up in New Jersey, so I'm a Jersey girl.
Hmm.
So I'm very straightforward. I don't think I'm aggressive or confrontational. Certain parts of the world I might be thought of, but it really bothers me when people just don't tell you what they think, right? It's like I'm a big girl. Just tell me what you think. If you thought that was too much, just tell me. Or if you don't want to go to the movies, just tell me. And that's a pet peeve that I have. And living in Seattle, there's a Scandinavian culture here,
Hmm.
and it's a little bit more standoffish, and it's really hard being a Jersey kid and being in that environment. I just wish people would just, you don't have to be mean, but I think being assertive, I think is a good thing, and a lot of people just aren't. And then that passive aggressive stuff is a pet peeve of mine.
And what's your advice for parents, students, college counselors listening to this interview?
It's kind of what I've been saying that, this process, I have a book that I'm writing in my head, a really tiny short book someday, and the title's really going to be It Doesn't Have to Be So Stressful. It really doesn't. It's about that the child, what they want to do in their next chapter, what they're good at, it doesn't have it's turned into just a crazy stressful process, and I don't think the kids are better off than you and I were when we went through it with almost no stress.
Yeah.
And and then and it worries me because then they go to college, and then college is more stressful than it used to be. So they're coming out of this pressure cooker into an even bigger pressure cooker, and it makes me sad. Like, kids should be able to be kids. 16, 17-year-olds should have some kid time, some downtime, everything. They don't have to take 5 APs all the time and be so programmed that they just don't really have any free time to just be. It's very worrisome, and I don't think there's that great book that Frank Bruni wrote. I always forget the
Where
title,
you'll
but
go
it's,
is not who
where
you'll
you
be. Where you'll go is not who you'll be.
exactly. And the whole first half, he talks about, I think he makes his point, it's like, okay, let's move on. Where you go to college doesn't make who you are. It's really where you go. Every college has so much to leverage, and kids can go to one of these highly ranked schools and just sit there in their room and study and take tests and not get anything out of it because they didn't leverage what was there. Just like they could go to some Western Washington University up north of me and just leverage everything and all the wonderful professors and come out with like crazy resume, great idea of how they want to change the world. And so, yeah, it's unfortunate. And I think all of us, like me, you and me as professionals, counselors can play that role to kind of take some deep breaths. Parents can play that role. If they're not part of the craziness, like, I just really say parent to parent, like, don't be part of that craziness. It's not good for you, it's not good for your kids, it's just really not. And I'm a firm believer they end up where they belong, even if they don't get into their dream school. When I was 17, I was so immature. Like, what's my dream school? Like, how do I really, my daughter, when we sent her back with the book to highlight stuff, and we came up an hour later and she had highlighted there's a tennis bubble because she played tennis in high school and it's cold. I'm like, these are the things that jumped out at you, like, smart girl, these are but they're kids, right? They're
Sure.
kids, and everything doesn't have to be so serious, is you know
Well, I have to read this quote. This is a quote I've read to our listeners before. It's in my book. I picked like my 10 favorite admissions quotes because it's basically what you said. And so this is from Gary Clark, who's now VP of Enrollment at UCLA. At the time, he was Director of Admissions. So this is what Gary said. Everything you do isn't about how it looks on a college application. High school is all about getting into the right college. Your undergraduate program is all about getting into the right MBA or JD or medical school. And then you wind up in your adulthood working where you have a family and you look back and you're like, I didn't really have fun. I didn't really get to be a kid. So that's
exactly.
exactly what you're
Yeah.
talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, don't choreograph your life for some ending that, like, have you even thought about it? I mean, and then you're in school and it's like, I got to get a job at Bain or McKinsey. It's just this constant. Yeah. And then I think at some point that individual looks back and it's like, wow, I wish I could do it again. Like my son had a really good friend at IU, brilliant kid. And everybody was like, oh, you can't get an internship with Google after freshman year. He's like, watch me. He did it. Then he had an internship with Goldman Sachs. He just did all this stuff. And he got to his senior year and he just got burned out. He was like, I'm done. Like he didn't even take the last class to graduate. He did it a couple years later and he graduated and he was fine. But he had this job with this premier private equity firm and he just finally said, thank you, but I don't want the job. I don't want to do this. And he got off the gerbil wheel or whatever you want to call it. And he figured his life out, but he just was in that mode. And it's just, it's crazy. It's just,
I remember this parent said something to me about 22 years ago, and it just always stuck with me. And it was, when do our kids ever get a chance to get off the treadmill?
yep, gerbil wheel treadmill. Yeah. And like I don't know about your upbringing, Mark, but I wasn't on the treadmill a lot of the times. I was being a happy-go-lucky
Yeah.
kid. I mean, I was, and a lot of us were back then. I mean, I'm 60, right? I'll just say my age. So it's been quite a few years, but I don't envy the kids nowadays. Yeah, you still, parents expected us to do the best we could and get good grades, but it was dramatically different from the way it is now.
Hey, this
Dramatically
has been
different.
awesome. I really thank you for being so generous with your time. Tell us more about College Aid Pro Services. We had Matt Carpenter on, and we recently had our 500th episode, and we had listeners send in what stood out to them, and two different people mentioned College Aid Pro. But tell us about the services that you guys offer.
Yeah, so we offer services around helping families navigate not just financial aid forms, but the whole planning process. And so I personally was charged when I joined CAP to build a team of experts, and I found people from all over the country that really know their way around the space. And we have our software, which I think is I'm biased, but I think it's the best thing out there, hands down. Mark, you're familiar with
Yeah,
it,
we love it.
where you can get in, you can start setting up a free account, and Mark will send some more information exactly how to get in there and set up your account. And then we've got a whole community once you're in there, but then we try and support families wherever they are. If it's to meet with an expert for an hour because you're freaked out about the FAFSA or appealing or just understanding your family, whatever that happens to be. Or we might have a financial aid forms package or an appeals package. We just meet you where you are. Or maybe you're a DIYer and you just want the software and you're going to do hours of research because you love this stuff and you're retired or whatever it is. So that's what we do. We're here to kind of be the North Star, the source of truth around this financial piece because there's so much information out there, some of it good, some of it flat out wrong, and we're really here to be your advocate. Your advocate as for families and, as I said earlier, increased transparency around this process that's pretty opaque.
No, you guys are doing outstanding work, and it was maybe a little over a year ago for all of the families that I work with privately and others on our team. They all get access to College Aid Pro. That's just something that we built in because we think it's really important to know this financial piece. And I don't know anyone whose software is as good as yours. And nothing's perfect, but what I like is that you guys have a team of data people that are always out there and finding ways of improving it or finding irregularities and then upgrading and making it
Yeah.
like better every year, which is great.
Yeah, the data team. We're not a huge company, and the data team is by far the biggest team at College Aid Pro because we're really serious about our data. Yeah.
So what should be the next steps if someone's hearing this and like, I want to know more about College Aid Pro? What do you recommend are the next steps?
Well, our website, easy to remember, collegeaidpro.com. And when you go on there, we have tons of information, a bit, like blog sort of stuff. So you can kind of immerse yourself in that. And then you'll see right there where it says get started and go ahead and click that. You set up a username and password, very few, a few onboarding questions, and you're into the software, and you can change your data inputs at any time. So if you're not sure about all the answers, we ask you how much you can afford for a year. And a lot of people like, I don't know. I'm like, this is the best thing ever. Now you're going to start thinking about it. And so don't worry if you don't have all the answers when you onboard yourself. It just takes like 3 or 4 minutes. You can go in and change it. We actually want you to play around with it. You get those student aid indexes. You mentioned net price calculators. That's a tool. We're finding a lot of them are much less accurate than we are because the colleges don't have to keep them updated. You get net cost projections, you get affordability over 4 years. I mean, and you get a community and all these experts, and we have free education as well. So that's the best place to just go to our website, click get started for free. And I know, Mark, you said you were going to send some stuff, but the actual URL for the software is mycap. So that's what we call it, .collegeaidpro.com.
Friends, a little over a year ago, the founder of College Aid Pro, Matt Carpenter, was on our podcast. And at the end of that interview, Matt extended a special offer to all of Your College Bound Kid listeners. And in talking to Peg, she said, we want to continue to extend that offer to our listeners. So I'm going to let you listen now to hear the special financial offer you can take advantage of to access CAP's services.
Anybody use a coupon code STUCKER20 for anything at College Aid Pro. Book an hour, use the software, use our Wake Me Up When It's Over services, 20% off. Yes, STUCKER20 will allow you to take advantage of that.
Very kind of you to do that. Very thoughtful. Thanks a lot, Matt, and we'll see you soon. Yeah, and you guys also have the best aid award comparison tool out there that I've seen too, which is really important for families to take a look at all of the offers they get because, friends, and if you're new to our podcast, you may not know this, but there's no standardization out there with aid awards, and some schools will include, non-billable fees, and others don't include them, and some don't have proper estimates for these things, or they'll use confusing things like make Parent Plus loans sound like grants. And so it's really helpful to just making sure you're doing a true apples for apples comparison when you look at all of the money and lay it out there. And sometimes people get confused because they gravitate to where they got their biggest award, but you're not thinking, okay, you got $23,000, but the cost of attendance was 90 over there. So that one's 67. And then this other one, the cost of attendance was 55, and they gave you 6, and you're gravitating toward the grant, but you're not looking at that other one's going to be 49. So, and I just think that tool that you use, College Board used to have a decent one. I don't know why they got rid of it on the Big Future website. So anyway, there's a lot of good resources. There's a free option for people to start with, and then you can decide from there whether or not you want to go for a paid option. So anyway, thanks again, Peg, for being so generous with your time. Keep up the great work you're doing over there at CAP.
Oh, well, thanks for having me. It was really fun to chat.
My pleasure. All right, friends, let's get to our college spotlight on the University of Texas, Austin with Dr. Ramon Blakley.
And now it's time for our college spotlight of the week.
Friends, Raymond and I have a robust discussion about Apply Texas, about whether Texas is considering early decision, and about how Senate Bill 175, which the bill which created UT's auto admission plan. How does it actually work? And how can out-of-state students stand out in a competitive admission pool? And we talk about the kind of student that excels at UT Austin. Listen and enjoy. I want to go back to something you mentioned. You mentioned Apply Texas earlier. So, I just completed this big 24-day Texas trip, right? I was on your state for almost all of April and a little bit of May, visiting a ton of schools.
Yeah.
I didn't meet a single person who liked Apply Texas when I would talk with the admission officers. In fact, Baylor said, we're not accepting it anymore, effective this year. And then I had other schools tell me, I wish we could do that, but we'll lose apps, and we don't want to lose apps, but we would if we could. And they were thrilled that Baylor was not accepting that.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
I can speak for UT Austin. I don't know.
Yes, I know.
Okay.
That's what I'm asking. I'm not asking about Baylor. And I don't know if this is a too political hot ball for you to
not
touch, but
political at all.
okay.
Yeah,
okay.
the Apply Texas application is an application that is supported by the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board, and we want to be able to receive applications via that tool. But we also want to be able to receive apps through the Common App. Students should choose the application that best suits their needs. We have found that based upon our applicant pool, that many students are choosing the Common App. And when we ask them, why are you choosing the Common App? I think they like that they like the UI, the user interface for the Common App. But we will accept either application, and we don't have a necessarily, it doesn't affect the admit rate on which application a student submitted. We do agree that the UI for the Common Application is extremely conducive to a student who is navigating the college search process, many of whom are doing this for the very first time. It's a smart application. And in fact, our promotion of the Common App is something that we do because we think that it is a great tool for students, and we provide it for them. If students feel as if they want to use that because they're applying to schools that are not necessarily on Apply Texas, but are also on the Common App, then I would imagine that they would probably choose the Common App. But if they're applying to schools that are just going to be on Apply Texas, maybe they'll choose to do that. But our history has shown that there is a real slant towards the Common Application. We just want to be there to be able to, interact with and get to know great students. And the tool that they use is not as important as the information that they provide to us and the credentials that they share with us to help us get to know them better.
Well, I know I got a mouthful from some other people who don't like the UI for Apply Texas.
Yeah.
They were lighting it up.
Well, we'll let the record show that I have not said that.
No, you were very diplomatic. You got those skills refined down there.
No skills at all. No skills at all. Just being honest. Yeah.
So a couple questions. I know that University of Michigan has added early decision in the last month. I had someone very active in Austin who thinks that's going to impact Texas because there's a lot of overlap with Michigan, Texas, blah, blah, blah. That's really not what I'm asking you, because who knows if it will or not. But there's two questions I want to ask. One, is there any conversation at all happening for ED for UT? And then the second one is, I know public schools, the Board of Regents, Board of Governors has so much more influence than they do in a private school setting. Would something like that be able to be done with like you and Miguel at your level, or would that kind of thing have to be done by like public officials?
So I'm not really sure about the impact that will have on us if Michigan is going that direction. I think I did see that, and I love the folks up there in Michigan, and respect the leadership there, great friends. That may have been done because of, they have a class to make, and maybe they felt that this is a good way to go about it. We don't have any plans or not even thinking about early decision at this point in time. And to be quite honest with you, I am not sure that we could or could not do it based upon legislation that exists. But I will say that any changes that we would make to the application process will have to be vetted. And depending upon the type of change that we would be thinking about, and I'm not saying that we're thinking about this by all means, it would be vetted, and it'd be vetted based upon how that would interact with current legislation that allows us to do what we do, our institutional mission, right? So, so I'm not ruling anything out, but I can tell you 100% that we have not had any thoughts or looked into at this point in time an early decision program. And we also feel as if students need opportunities, right? We feel like, us going to an early action, we did that with the idea that it's simply a way for us to commit to getting an earlier response to students, but we still want them to have opportunities. And so we are not, of the thought process that, this contractual situation that would come from an early decision is something that would work for us at this point in time, and we haven't looked into it. But again, every institution makes decisions based upon, their own enrollment goals and their own challenges. And so hats off to the folks up in Ann Arbor that found that this would be something that would benefit them. But it's not our jam right now. And I'll be interested in seeing what happens with it. We'll be watching closely to see what happens with it for sure.
So let's talk about how you do admissions, which is very creative. I want to tell you my understanding. I want you to critique me and tell me if I'm getting it right and fill in the gaps. So I want to say 97, you went to 10% auto admit. If you're from the state of Texas and you're ranked in the top 10% of your class, then you were auto admitted to UT, but no guarantee to major. In fact, some more competitive majors were going to be a lot more selective than that. And then I don't remember the year, but it went to 6%. And then more recently, it's gone to 5%. And I want to say something like 70% of the class, you can correct that, has to come in from that 5% auto admit, but you admit 90% from Texas. So there's still room for another 20% that can come in through not auto admit, but holistic review. And then that leaves, last I heard, it was 8% for the rest of the 49 contiguous states and 2% international that can come in, not through any auto admit, but more similar to how that other 20% in Texas are admitted. Is correct what I got wrong on that?
No, I mean, you've been doing your homework quite a bit. So the law is Senate Bill 175, and basically it says that we have a very special admission policy that is unique to the University of Texas, even within the state of Texas, right? So all of the public universities basically have the top 10% rule, which is in the state, right? So the top 10% rule means that if a student graduates within the top 10% of their high school graduating class, then they have automatic admission to a public university. That applies to every public university with the exception of UT Austin. And so what we can do with SB 175 is that it gives us an opportunity to cap the percentage of our incoming Texas resident freshman class that we fill with automatic admits. But that cap is 75% of the entering resident class. So 75% of the students have to be in the top, in the automatic admission, whatever we would indicate that to be. At this point in time, it will be top 5% beginning for students that will be entering in fall 26. And you're right, it has changed. I think it's important to note that we aren't just changing that auto admit percentage willy-nilly. We're looking at current high school enrollment rates within the state. And there's a lot of folks that are way, way more mathematician than I that help us predict what that would look like. And so now we think that the 5% is going to allow us to maintain the class sizes and student teacher ratio that we think have helped us be able to continue to be competitive from a graduation rate and a retention rate standpoint. So that's the 75. So 25% of the students that are admitted fall outside of that. Now, you did say something that I want to make sure is clear. A lot of folks say that 75% are automatically admitted and 25% are holistically reviewed. I think the only correction I want to make is that every student is holistically reviewed, because even if students are in that top automatic admit percentage, they still a holistic review for their major, but we do guarantee that they'll be admitted to the university.
Okay.
The 25% are definitely also holistically reviewed, and there's a lot of students that actually are successfully admitted through that end. Then when it comes to out-of-state students, so 90% of our students have to be Texas residents, and then 10% can be out-of-state, and that's just how math works, 90-10, right? The part that you asked about is relates to international versus the other 49 contiguous states, or the 50 states outside of Texas. The 49 states outside of Texas. We don't necessarily, the law doesn't require us to have a 8% breakdown. It just says 10% can be out of state. And so sometimes it has been exactly the way that you described it. 2% are international and 8% are non-resident Texan, non-residents, Texas non-residents. But in general, that's how that falls. 90-10 Texan versus non-Texan, and then 75-25 for that automatic admit.
Yeah, and I think I said 70. I meant to say 75, but that 70, that 75, isn't that also in the bill? Like, isn't that also mandated that you have to take 75 by auto admit?
75% is in the bill, 100%.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So one question from one of our co-hosts, Julia from Massachusetts. She wants to know if there are anything you can share for out-of-state students that they could, help them stand out in that out-of-state applicant pool.
Yeah, I think it's important to know for out-of-state students, we absolutely, even though you see 10%, that 10% is extremely important to us, and we think that out-of-state students provide a tremendous resource in terms of just their lived experiences to our campus community. So we're excited that we continue to draw interest from every state, and so I think to answer the question about how students can stand out, I think this is the advice that I would give even to students that are Texans, and whether even if they're automatic admits and want to stand out, or they're not, is think less about what it is that the university wants to hear and more about, being authentic. Yes, there are things that we want you to look at in terms of core curriculum and all those types of things. We definitely need for you to complete the entire application. We require that you submit a test score. But the reality is a lot of the rich information we get comes from the non-quantitative information that's on the application as well. And so, use every opportunity as an out-of-state student to talk genuinely about why the University of Texas is not just a place that you're applying, but a place that you are certain that you can thrive, and you know about programs here, about what's offered, and you have thought about your life as a Longhorn from through the lens of these are the things that I want to be involved in. Not just I want to go to football games or I want to wear burnt orange, but I want to be an Archer Scholar. So I'm familiar with this program that you have in Washington, D.C., whereby students are able to work at the Capitol. I'm particularly interested in the UTNY program, where we've got this campus in New York where students can engage with both Wall Street as well as the theater district and lots of different things that they can get involved in there, and while taking classes in arguably one of the greatest cities in the world. So we want students to stand out by seeing and understanding how their goals and aspirations can connect with what we have to offer here at the university.
So I want to get your feedback on this, Raymond. Like I said, I spent 2 days there. I got on the admitted, what's kind of cool? I got on the admitted student visit tours when I was there.
Cool.
And one of my students was there.
Oh,
from
cool.
from New York, who I'd actually never met before. He's like on the
Okay.
tour with me. It was pretty cool. So I spent one day kind of doing that. Somebody in your office hooked me up, and then because Raymond was out of the area when I was there. We tried to connect, and he was traveling. But then the next day, I just spent just talking with students, just meeting them, picking their brains. It was awesome. This is some of the impressions that I got, and I want to see if you feel this is fair. I
Okay.
felt the students were very driven, especially the Macomb students, very driven. And I felt that they were very, so I guess this goes with being driven, but they were going to be proactive. Like they were go-getters. They were going to reach out and get engaged because there's all kinds of clubs and zillions of things. I mean, your school is very big, and so is A&M,
Yeah.
by the way, like big and large. These are big and large places. And you could get lost if you're more of that passive person, but the person that's like going to grab the opportunities by the horn and go for it, they were like in heaven there. And I really felt like you need a little bit of go-getter in you to be a really successful or to thrive or for you to just feel like this is my place. Do you
That's
feel
good.
that's fair? Do you feel that's fair?
Absolutely, man. Whenever I'm asked about our students, and maybe this is something that kind of helps also for students to think about, what it's like to be here, and maybe some would choose to apply or not apply based upon this. But I feel like our students are, first of all, they're academically talented, right? I mean, they excel in rigorous academic environments. Obviously, many of them are their top students from their high schools, and they come with all the AP, IB, and credit courses, and they bring a strong analytical problem-solving set of skills with them. They're driven. I think you kind of spoke to that. They're ambitious. They're go-getters. Whenever when you think about things like starting nonprofits, launching startups, conducting undergraduate research, we do have a good group of students that are in that space. And we've got this great undergraduate research initiative, which is a freshman research initiative, which is probably unheard of at R1 schools, whereby freshmen are involved in research. And we do that better than just about anybody else in the country. But our students aim high and they're drawn to competitive fields. One thing that I like to say is they're intellectually curious, but so they're curious and they're innovative, so that it's valued here to ask questions, big questions, seek solutions. It's Austin, so students are socially engaged. They care deeply about issues of the community and the world that they live in. There's a great deal of leadership that's here. And so, that also kind of tags into some of the things that we see in the college application as well, because students are, coming to us having been involved in student government, but they come here and they're also involved in those types of things, those types of clubs. I don't think they're afraid to lead. They have a good sense of influence and what that looks like, and aren't afraid to speak up. Yeah, I mean, they're extremely collaborative. I mean, the key performance indicators indicate that they're resilient, they're adaptable. And this is a fast-paced kind of environment, but it's not just our campus, Mark. I think it's the city of Austin, right? You gotta come here and experience it. It is a very unique place because it brings together various students from various cultures, economically diverse, ideologically diverse folks a part of one specific community. And I think that's what really, now this may be any college, right? Some people say, well, that sounds like every college. I think there's something special about Austin, though.
Yeah, do you know what it reminded me of in a lot of ways? Something I experienced when I'm in the Silicon Valley, and I would also say the Research Triangle.
Yeah.
Like you do sort of feel like you're in a innovation hub.
There you go.
And that sort of feels like that filters from the city into the mindset of the college.
Yeah, 100%.
Friends, this concludes this part of my interview with Ramon Blakley. Hope you join us next week for the next segment. Friends, on Monday's episode, we'll have the final part of the Bob Massa interview, and Susan joins me for that. We'll also have the final part of our lawyer forum. John and Jeff will join me to talk about careers in law. And then we have a very special ending for you, something we've never done before. It's really creative. You got to stay to the end to hear it. In fact, it's the reason why I flipped the order. You remember at the start, I started out with the lawyer panel first, and then the Bob Massa interview at the end, and then halfway through I flipped the order. Did that intentionally because I want you to hear the ending of the lawyer panel. So that's not when you're going to want to cut off until the very end. And friends, never forget, it's not where you go. It's not where you go. It's what you do when you get there. It's what you do when you get out of there. That is what will determine your lack of career success or your career success. See you on Monday, friends. And that's our show. Big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you will get every single episode as soon as they are released. If you want to support our podcast, you can click the share button, send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can say positive things about your college-bound kid on your social media feed. And you can help us stay commercial-free and pay our staff by donating on the yourcollegeboundkid.website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. And if you have a question or a recommendation, just go to speakpipe.com/YCBK, hit the orange button, and speak. We will do our best to get your question in your own voice on an upcoming episode. I am the producer of the podcast, and I live in Metro Atlanta. We have a fantastic team that has over 200 years of admissions and counseling experience. Shout out to our co-hosts, Dr. Lisa Ruff in North Carolina, Susan Tree in Pennsylvania, Vince Garcia in California, Julia Escobar in Massachusetts, Linda Depker in Missouri, Andy Strickler, the Chief Enrollment Officer at Connecticut College, New London, Connecticut, Hillary Dickman, an admission officer at Colorado College in Colorado Springs, and our international admissions expert, Kevin Newton in Dallas, Texas. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Matvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs from Kimberly Bloss. Our reliable webmaster is Stylionis Dimitru. Website updates are done by Joyce Stucker. Our image editor is Vlad Honchar. If you want to have a coaching session with me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you want to reach someone else on our team, all of our bios with contact info can be found at yourcollegeboundkid.com under the About YCBK tab. If you want to get our free monthly YCBK newsletter, YCBK Plus, it is also under the About YCBK tab. If you want to see our recommended books and websites, they are on our website under the Resources tab. While you're on our website, check out our hundreds of interviews in their entirety. Check out our college spotlights, our blog, and our upcoming events. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting with you every single Monday and every single Thursday.